Salve viewers, and welcome back to Let's Translate Eutropius Breviarium Historiae Romanae ab orbe condita. Last time we took a very brief dive into a very brief chapter with an alliance formed between the king of Egypt Ptolemy and the Romans, as well as a slightly different way to say what year it was. By slight, I mean very slight. But anyways, this time we're going through the next two chapters because though it's a little longer, they're very similar. So, let's get into it. Quinto Ogulnio Gaio Fabio Pictore consulibus, picentes bellum commovere, et ab insequentibus consulibus Publio Sempronio ab Appio Claudio victi sunt, et de his triumphatum est. So Quinto Ogulnio Gaio Fabio Pictore consulibus, we saw this just last chapter, as well as many other times. Just ablative of time when? During the consulship of Quintus Ogulnius and Gaius Fabius Pictor. Yeah, Pictor. Which also, Ogulnius, that's a weird name for Romans. I've not seen a name like that before. It's weird. But in the consulship of Quintus Ogulnius and Gaius Fabius Pictor, picentes bellum commovere. Picentes, these are people that live in northern Italy. And bellum, of course, war, our object, and commovere, it comes from commoveo, which is to move something, or I guess you could say commence something, stir something up. So, basically, they started war. The Picentes started a war. Et and ab insequentibus consulibus Publio Sempronio Appio Claudio victi sunt. So, all of this is just one prepositional phrase, so let's just go to the verb victi sunt. Perfect past participle, as we see many times. They were conquered, or they were defeated. Ab insequentibus consulibus. By. Ab can mean from, but or by. So here it's by. Insequentibus, from insequens, which means the following. Consulibus, consuls. By the following consuls. Publius Sempronius, and Appius Claudius. Not the same Appius Claudius as I had talked about during the Pyrrhic War, because that guy was old and blind. This is a different Appius Claudius, because the Romans are very unoriginal with names. But probably related to him, if I were to guess. So far, during the consulship, or while Quintus Ogulnius and Gaius Fabius Pictor were consul, the Picentes began a war, and they were defeated by the following consuls, Publius Sempronius and Appius Claudius. Et and de his, on account of these things, the triumphatum est. It's not plural, so we can't really say they triumphed. I guess just a triumph was had, since, yeah, this is perfect passive, so I guess just a triumph was had or held on account of these things. So whole sentence. While Quintus Ogulnius and Gaius Fabius Pictor were consuls, the Picentes began a war, and by the following consuls, Publius Sempronius and Appius Claudius, they were defeated. Either that or just they were defeated before this. And on account of these things, a triumph was held. Now, if you're wondering what exactly brought on this war, well, so am I, as are most people who actually know about this war, because this is a very inconsequential war, but that's probably because there's so little information on this war. I mean, look at these sources. There's barely anything. So few sources compared to the Pyrrhic War. Which, I mean, last chapter I didn't have a ton of sources either, but yeah, these are just smaller events. But this is an entire war, yet there's only really 3 sources that I could find. But actually, let's talk about these sources real quick, because we have a couple new ones. First up, we have Florus and his Epitome of Roman History. The work is largely based on Livy, kind of like an earlier version of Eutropius Breviarium, since it's another brief history of the Romans and based on Livy. And it was likewise popular throughout the Middle Ages. Now, we're not entirely sure who this Florus is, as there are several names given in different manuscripts. We at least know the work was written somewhere in the 2nd century CE, since it states the time of writing was a little less than 200 years after the Emperor Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. Many seem to believe him to be Publius Annius Florus, who was an author in the 2nd century CE, so fits the time, and was a friend of the Emperor Hadrian. So an author, lived around the correct time, and he's a friend of the Emperor Hadrian, so that automatically gives him bonus points. So we're just going to go with that. We also have Orosius and his History Against the Pagans. Paulus Orosius was a 4th to 5th century Roman priest and historian living around the same time as Eutropius, so that's kind of neat. And another connection. We've got a work by Florus, which is similar to Eutropius's work, and we've got Orosius, who lived around the same time as Eutropius. It's pretty neat. Orosius was also a student of St. Augustine of Hippo, and he's best known for his work, which is the work I'm referencing here, called The 7 Books of Histories Against the Pagans. As you can guess from the title, it is very hostile to the old religion of the Greeks and Romans, and sometimes it can kind of be entertaining through how hostile it is, as well as some more out there claims, like apparently instead of anti-elephant wagons, the Romans used fiery brands and fire darts against Pyrrhus's elephants. I also wish I had discovered Orosius earlier, because he gives some oddly specific claims to Eutropius that I didn't see anywhere else. My main example for this is that he has the exact same number of casualties for the Battle of Asculum, which was, I think, 20,000 for the Epirotes and 5,000 for the Romans. Very specific, yet he matches Eutropius perfectly, whereas no other source does. So either they're using similar sources, or maybe they're sharing information? No evidence to that, but I think it's really interesting how these claims from these authors from around the same time are about the same, as opposed to the other sources I've looked at from past these authors and way before these authors don't match these claims. So okay, now that we've got these sources out of the way, let's talk about the source of this war. So Orosius and the Periochae don't even give a reason. They just say it happened. Maybe I didn't even need to introduce those sources. Well, except I did, because Florus says it's revenge, since they had opposed the Romans during the previous war. The previous war being the war against Pyrrhus, of course. And yeah, that's all I got. This war is not talked about very much. So yeah, again, not much information. So let's continue on. Conditae a Romanis civitates Ariminum in Gallia et Beneventum in Samnio. So, our subject is civitates. This is just cities. So cities, conditae, another perfect passive participle just without the est. Cities, conditae, ab orbe condita, were founded a Romanis, by the Romans. And what cities? Well, Ariminum, in Gallia, in Gaul, and Beneventum, in Samnio, in Samnium, where the Samnites were. So, apparently Ariminum was the capital of the Pagans, and it's in Gaul because they're kind of on the cusp of Cisalpine Gaul. Not all of modern Italy was called Italy in the ancient world. The area, I think around the Po Valley was called Cisalpine Gaul. Gaul on the same side as the Alps, as the Romans. And then the rest of Gaul, which is modern-day France, was called Transalpine Gaul, which is Gaul across the Alps from the Romans. So Ariminum city founded in Gaul, and Beneventum in Samnio. Beneventum in Samnium. In Beneventum, I had mentioned previously that 1, battle was fought here against Pyrrhus, and 2, it used to be called Maleventum. And this is apparently around the time that Maleventum becomes Beneventum, with the colony being founded. Because, yeah, these aren't exactly entirely new cities that the Romans are founding. These are colonies. Potentially, the Romans kind of depopulated the cities and colonized it with Roman citizens. Romanized them, you could say. Though it seems Florus is a bit mistaken here, as Eutropius and Livy in the Periochae both agree that Ariminum is the city of the Pagans that got a colony, while Florus says it was Asculum, which is much farther south. Like, I read that, and I was like, that's weird. I didn't realize Pyrrhus got that far north, because Pyrrhus also fought a battle at Asculum. But no, Asculum is way farther south than the Pagans land. So, Ariminum really makes much more sense. So, whole chapter. While Quintus Ogulnius and Gaius Fabius Pictor were consuls, the Pagans started a war. And they were defeated by the following consuls, Publius Sempronius and Appius Claudius. And on account of these things, a triumph was held. Cities were founded by the Romans. Ariminum in Gallia and Beneventum in Samnium. I just said in Gallia instead of in Gaul, didn't I? Well, it works. Marco Attilio Regulo, Lucio Iulio Libone, consulibus, Salantinis in Apulia bellum indictum est, captique sunt cum civitate simul Brundisini et dehis triumphatum est. So, once again, Marco Attilio Regulo, Lucio Iulio Libone consulibus, while Marcus Attilius Regulus and Lucius Iulius Libo were consuls, which maybe are the following consuls? This is the following event in many of the sources, in some of the sources at least, in the sources that I've seen at least. Salantinis, this looks dative or ablative to me, so not the subject. In Apulia, I guess the Salantines were in Apulia. Bellum indictum est. And we've seen this exact kind of sentence in chapter 11, when war was declared against the Salantines in Apulia. And Apulia, similar to the Tarentines, because they're right near there, it was at the heel end of Italy. It was right around there, right around the same area as Tarentum. Captique and well, technically it's Capti sunt, which, that's interesting, honestly. How the que, I guess, because I always think of the perfect passive participle with, the participle and the est as a unit. But for the purpose of que as a suffix to meet for the conjunction, it goes just on the participle. Or I guess if you were to put the form of sum in front of the participle, though, did we see that once? I feel like we saw that once in Eutropius. But I guess it just goes on the first word in the next phrase. So, captique sunt cum civitate simul Brundisini et dehis triumphatum est. So, and Brundisini is our subject. The Brundisians were captured, perfect passive participle, as we've seen before. Cum civitate. Civitate is from the same noun as civitates. Yeah, I should have said that up back in with civitates, but oh well. Civitas means city. And civitates, nominative plural, civitate, ablative singular. So with the city, simul, I guess it's at the same time. But honestly, I like saying the Brundisians were captured along with the city. Which, by the city, it means Brundisium, which was a city right on the heel. An excellent trading port for the Adriatic Sea, that sea to the east of Italy. And Brundisium would have been like the capital of the Salentines. And, on account of these things, a triumph was had. So let's go over this sentence real quick. While Marcus Atilius Regulus and Lucius Iulius Libo were consuls, war was declared against the Salentines in Apulia. And the Brundisians were captured along with their city. And on account of these things, a triumph was held. So then, why did this war start? Do we have any more information on this one than with the Picentine War? Not much. It's about the same. The Periochae, of course, don't give a reason, just say that it happened. But Florus says it was the same as the Picentes, revenge for defying Rome in the Tarentine War. Which I don't think I ever said, but the Romans seemed to often call what we more often call the Pyrrhic War the Tarentine War. Because, the Tarentines started it. Potentially in a similar vein, though Zonaras doesn't mention the Picentine War, he does say this war was because the Salentines helped Pyrrhus. Not only that, but he gives a general kind of geopolitical strategy rather than just revenge. He says that this war was partially because the Salentines and Brundisium, their capital, are at the heel of Italy, and it was an excellent port on the Adriatic Sea, so controlling that gives a lot of control over trade. So the war was mostly revenge, but maybe also a bit over control of trade routes. Other than that, I have very little to say because we have so little information on this war. And Florus also basically says that it happened, it was also because of revenge, but he does have a weird little detail that doesn't seem to really matter, but it's kind of neat, where he mentions a very little known Roman goddess of sheep called Pales, who apparently demanded a temple during this war. Kinda an odd detail. But either way, that's the whole of these 2 chapters. So let's go on to a Latin reading of the chapters and then an English reading of the chapters. Quinto Augulnio Caio Fabio Pictore consulibus, Picentes bellum commovere, et ab insequentibus consulibus Publio Sempronio Appio Claudio victi sunt, et de his triumphatum est. Conditae a Romanis civitates, remenum in Gallia, et beneventum in Samnio. Marco Attilio Regulo, Lucio Iulio Libone consulibus, Salentinis in Apulia bellum indictum est. Captique sunt, cum civitates simul Brundisini, et de his triumphatum est. While Quintus Augulnius and Gaius Fabius Pictor were consuls, the Picentes started a war, and they were defeated by the following consuls Publius Sempronius and Appius Claudius, and on account of these things, a triumph was held. Cities were founded by the Romans, Ariminum in Gaul, and Beneventum in Samnium. While Marcus Atilius Regulus and Lucius Iulius Libo were consuls, war was declared against the Salentines in Apulia, and the Brundisians were captured along with their city, and on account of these things, a triumph was held. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. These last 2 videos were kind of just, these are short chapters, so I can get them out pretty quickly. Honestly, the rest of book 2, those are very long chapters, so I'm probably going to try to work on some other kinds of videos before I get to those. But if you did enjoy these shorter, kind of snappier videos, then let me know, because there might be some shorter bits of Latin that I can make videos on, so that there could be some shorter videos in between the big long ones, like all the Pyrrhus ones. But either way, until next time, valete, Viatores.